These days, being a voice actor for video games is a well-respected profession, and if you're a fan of gaming, you probably recognise names like Troy Baker, Jennifer Hale, and Nolan North whenever they pop up in a title's credits. It wasn't always like that, however, and it seems like some developers just used any old Tom, Dick, and Harry to voice the characters in their games. And oh boy, does it show.
What will you gain with one more victim?
For this list, we're taking a look back at some games with laughably bad voice acting. It doesn't necessarily mean the games themselves are bad, though there are some stinkers on here. It's just that when it came to their voice performances, we doubt there were any award winners among this bunch. Whether bad writing is to blame, poor direction, or simply awful acting, all of these games have multiple sins to answer for. I want you to get on your knees and give me 10 Hail Laura Baileys. Now! I'm Ashton from TripleJump, and here are 10 ridiculous video game voice acting fails. Number 10, Heavy Rain. Face it, this game's voice acting was doomed from the second we had to wander around the mall, pressing X to Jason.
Jason!
A sequence so laughable that it's been memed and parodied into absolute oblivion. For what it's worth, Heavy Rain isn't a terrible game. In fact, it's got a lot of good ideas, a decent story, and interesting gameplay mechanics. Sadly, the performances from the voice actors really let it down.
Move your...
Yeah.
I'm waiting.
Part of the problem is a slightly bizarre decision that was taken to cast mostly French and English actors as Americans, as it's clear that there were some real struggles to both deliver the lines and keep up the accents. All credits to the actors, the accents, at least to an English ear, aren't totally horrible, but there is something about the dialogue that seems stilted, like the person delivering the lines is really having to overthink what they're saying at all times.
The more clues we get, the more we can reduce the zone.
Couple that with the hilarious delivery of the word Jason, which ended up sounding more like a market seller trying to flog us half a pound of apples than it did a desperate father trying to find his lost son, then you end up with characters who completely take the audience out of the moment. Number 9, GTA London, 1969. Nice. Imagine, if you will, what would happen if you described the film Snatch to someone who'd never come across a Londoner before. Then, you asked them to impersonate Vinnie Jones. Well, voila! You've basically recreated the voice performances in GTA London 1969. We can't be sure whether or not the acting is bad on purpose in order to parody the Cockney mobster stereotype, because surely no one at Rockstar listened to that performance and thought, yeah, that is spot on, everyone will definitely take this one seriously. Shockingly, there's very little information out there about the people who gave the game's voice performances, which would lead us to suspect that they were not professional voice actors. The actual writing leaves a lot to be desired as well, because after all, there's only so much even a pro voice actor can do with lines like,
God and Bennett, that was some firework.
And,
remember, I'm the monkey and you're the cheese grater.
No, we don't have a clue what that means either. What's really bizarre is that the game won a BAFTA award for the sound design, a decision by the British Academy of Film and Television Arts that we can only assume was taken late at night after a few pints.
In a few years, I'll be taking over the whole breadbasket.
Number 8, Mega Man 8. By the time Mega Man 8 was released in 1996, audiences had started to suspect that Capcom no longer had much in the way of love for the titular blue-suited hero, and based on what the game had to offer, they weren't wrong. Critically, the game did okay, but the main issue that reviewers had with the game was that it brought absolutely nothing new to the table. Well, with the exception of the awful voice acting in the English dub, that is.
I have a favour to ask.
You could be forgiven for thinking that something was lost in translation between the Japanese and English versions of the game, and that either the writers or the translators are to blame. Although the dialogue is missing one or two of the informalities of normal speech, however, overall it's not the worst we've heard, so we feel like this one was squarely on the voice actors and whoever was in charge of giving them direction.
We may be able to locate another energy emission from the radar room.
Not only is the delivery of the lines incredibly wonky, with the actors sounding like they're reciting from an instruction manual in a language they don't quite understand, but a whole bunch of errors were also left in the final product.
You must recover all the energy immediately, Mega Man.
Now, what was it they were saying about Capcom and no longer caring? Number 7, Castlevania, Symphony of the Night. Despite it being considered one of the best video games of all time owing to its massive world, its graphics, and just how fun it is to play overall, Castlevania Symphony of the Night suffers from one major flaw, and that is its absolutely atrocious voice acting that's on display.
Your own kind called me forth with praise and tribute.
The actual writing isn't the most egregious we've ever heard, and in terms of the voices themselves, they seem to fit the character perfectly well, but it's just the delivery of the dialogue that is a little jarring.
Yes, the dark priest called Shaft, come to cleanse the world in the forge of chaos.
The game's characters speak like there's a slight processing delay between their brains thinking a thought and their mouths saying the words, with the results being that they end up sounding completely robotic. We can only assume that this is down to the lack of clarity on the part of the voice actors, who deliver the lines like they're unsure of who their characters are, what the story is, and what anyone is supposed to be doing and why.
Stand with me as Prince of all the world!
Considering how brilliant everything else in Castlevania Symphony of the Night is, we have to draw the conclusion that the devs ran out of budget before they managed to hire the voice actors. Oh well, no one's perfect. Not even you, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. At number 6, Clock Tower. Although it suffers from some incredibly questionable voice acting, Clock Tower is, on the whole, a pretty good addition to the survival horror genre. Released in 1996 in Japan, 1997 in North America, and 1998 in Europe, Clock Tower, or Clock Tower 2 if you want to get Japanese about this, follows a whole load of slightly wooden characters as they attempt to survive the antics of antagonist Scissorman. Although the game attempts to be massively spooky, it is completely let down by the performances of its voice actors, whose robotic delivery is guilty of taking the player out of the moment on more than one occasion.
You may be her guardian, but you are also my assistant.
Rather than sounding afraid, intrigued, or any of the other many emotions one might expect to feel when confronted with a serial killer, the characters all deliver their lines as though they're giving a TED talk on the best ways to remove lint from a washing machine. Whether by choice or happy accident, the voice lines in the game are limited, with most of the non-cutscene dialogues delivered through subtitles instead of spoken word. It's a double-edged sword, however, as you'll have just gotten back into the atmosphere of the game before Professor Barton yanks you right back out of the moment again with one of his robotic monologues.
There's always a danger of turning toward evil.
Number 5, The House of the Dead 2. Bearing in mind the fact that The House of the Dead 2 is an arcade light gun game where the focus is squarely on shooting zombies right in their stupid faces, we weren't exactly expecting Shakespeare from the voice actors, but come on guys, could we not have at least tried?
This is a present from me to you.
It turns out, however, that the people providing the voices were not entirely to blame for their horrible performances, as rumour has it, the budget for the game was so low, the developers ended up bringing in random people off the street to bring the characters to life. And oh boy, does it show.
We're meeting G over there.
Admittedly, the writing also leaves a lot to be desired. After all, I can't see myself screaming, "Go away," at a mob of hungry zombies like they're a troop of Girl Scouts trying to sell me cookies. But pair that with absolutely horrible delivery from the voice cast, and you've got a recipe for disaster. Still, this assault on our ears clearly didn't do anything to slow down the House of the Dead franchise, as Sega have gone on to release a further 3 sequels, though at least they seem to have learnt their lesson and gotten in professionals to provide their voices.
James, what should I do?
Number 4, Ride to Hell Retribution. I know we said that the games on this list weren't necessarily bad, but this one most definitely is. Ride to Hell Retribution is so awful, in fact, that it holds an average review score of just 19 on Metacritic, and is the only game rated worse was 2012's Family Party, 30 Great Games Obstacle Arcade for the Wii U. One of the things that contributed to Ride to Hell's abysmal review score was, you guessed it, its voice acting.
Jake. My name's Jake.
In fairness to the cast of largely unknown performers, they really didn't have a lot to work with, as the game's writing was a complete joke, and most of the dialogue sounds like it was written by someone that's never had a conversation with a real human being.
You've gotten to be one tall sack of shit.
Yeah.
Even with that said, however, the voice acting is still horrendous.
He's just a kid.
We get that there's only so much you can do with a bunch of horrible lines, but even so, the entire cast sounds like they've been given some kind of emotion-suppressing drug before stepping into the recording booth.
Jake, on your feet.
It's time.
With all that in mind, we're left to draw the conclusion that the 1% quoted on Ride to Hell Retribution's box art was the amount of care anyone could be bothered to put into this game. Number 3, Resident Evil. When it comes to bad voice acting in video games, despite not being the very worst offender, most people's minds still go straight to 1997's Resident Evil. Although it is a fantastic example of 90s survival horror, praised by critics for its story, spooky atmosphere and clever puzzles, it's very much let down by the performances of the voice cast.
Ha! It seems like this bulletproof jacket is pretty strong.
I see.
The issues with the English localization of Resident Evil ultimately come down to a couple of different points. Firstly, the game was originally written and acted in Japanese, so when it came time to make changes for an English-speaking audience, all of the dialogue had to be translated. And sadly, phrases that made complete sense in Japanese sounded quite peculiar following the translation. The performances, for their part, did the best with the materials that they had, but with lines like,
Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
And
that was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
Even a master of the craft would have trouble making it sound good. Not to mention the fact that the actors had to deliberately slow down their delivery so that non-English speakers could understand what they were saying. Still, as stilted as the dialogue in Resident Evil is, it's hard to deny that it's a huge part of what makes the game so charming.
And get the hell out of here. Understood?
Yes, sir!
Number 2, Hotel Mario. The story behind Hotel Mario is a bit of a weird one. Nintendo signed a deal with Philips to make a CD-ROM based add-on for the SNES, and despite the fact that the product never made it to the market, Philips still ended up with the license to use a number of Nintendo characters for games on the CDI. These included a couple of characters from the Mario franchise and a handful of folks from the Legend of Zelda series. Don't worry, dear viewer, we will get to those. Though Hotel Mario fared better with critics than its Zelda counterparts, there still wasn't an awful lot of praise for the game, and it's frequently cited as the worst Mario game ever made. In particular, Mario's voice acting received criticism, not only because the actual delivery of the dialogue was poor, but also because the voices just didn't fit the characters.
That's that creepy Bowser's laugh. Look!
Since 1992, Mario's iconic playful voice has been provided by Charles Martinet, a voice actor of great renown. Sadly, he did not get the part in Hotel Mario, which instead went to Mark Grau, and everyone's favourite Italian plumber ended up sounding like someone doing a bad impression of a mob boss.
Dear pesky plumbers, the Koopalings and I have taken over the Mushroom Kingdom.
So dialogue that should have been kind of fun ended up sounding mildly threatening.
I dare you to find her if you can.
Mario, please, I swear I'll get you the money soon. And number 1, Link, The Faces of Evil, and Zelda, The Wand of Gamelon. I told you we hadn't seen the last of the crimes against Nintendo that were the Philips games on the CDI. Like Hotel Mario, both Link, The Faces of Evil and Zelda, The Wand of Gamelon were developed without an awful lot of input from Nintendo, and lordy does it show.
Gee, it sure is boring around here.
The games were, well, they were not good. And though critical responses at the time of release were mixed, with some praise going to the animation of the cutscenes, but when viewed through a contemporary lens, people realised they were gosh darn awful, owing, at least in part, to the hugely wonky voice acting.
You're pretty good. Here. Thanks.
The performances are certainly enthusiastic, to say the least, but the delivery of the lines is absolutely atrocious. Admittedly, the writing isn't the best. I can't imagine that my reaction to being told I was the only person who could defeat Ganon would be,
"Great, I'll grab my stuff."
But even taking this into consideration, the performances are completely laughable. Link delivers all of his lines with the excited glee of an overstimulated 5-year-old.
How about a kiss, for luck?
And everyone else puts on performances so hammy that they might as well be glazed with honey and roasted. There's no wonder that Link isn't allowed to speak anymore.